The term neurodiversity was coined in 1998 by Australian autism advocate Judy Singer, who wrote an undergraduate honors thesis on the topic, which would be published almost 20 years later as the book Neurodiversity, The Birth of an Idea. The term was popularized, however, by American journalist Harvey Bloom, who, in September of 1998, published an article in The Atlantic titled Neurodiversity on the Neurological Underpinnings of Geekdom. In this short piece, Bloom describes the website of a fictitious Institute for the Study of the Neurologically Typical, or the ISNT, which, Bloom explains, is a parody of the institutes and journals devoted to the study of autism. The website provides answers to frequently asked questions such as, "What is NT?" to which it provides the answer,
Neurotypical syndrome is a neurobiological disorder characterized by preoccupation with social concerns, delusions of superiority, and obsession with conformity. Neurotypical individuals often assume that their experience of the world is either the only one or the correct one. NTs find it difficult to be alone. NTs are often intolerant of seemingly minor differences in others. When in groups, NTs are socially and behaviorally rigid, and frequently insist upon the performance of dysfunctional, destructive, and even impossible rituals as a way of maintaining group identity. NTs find it difficult to communicate directly, and have a much higher incidence of lying as compared to persons on the autistic spectrum. NT is believed to be genetic in origin. Autopsies have shown the brain of the neurotypical is typically smaller than that of an autistic individual, and may have overdeveloped areas related to social behavior.
To the question, how common is it, the ISNT site answers,
Tragically, as many as 9,625 out of every 10,000 individuals may be neurotypical.
To the question, are there any treatments for NT? The site responds,
There is no known cure for neurotypical syndrome. However, many NTs have learned to compensate for their disabilities and interact normally with autistic persons.
In response to the question, could I be NT? The site provides an online NT screening test. As Bloom observes, the ISNT inverts our understanding of what is normal and what is pathological, and suggests that neurodiversity could just as well be seen as the ideological norm and as an advantage, particularly in an increasingly high-tech world. As one visitor to the ISNT site observed,
NTs have terrible difficulty adjusting to the predictability and logic of computer technology, instead expecting the machine to conform to their wishes.
As another visitor stated,
My parents are NT, and my brother and sister are NT. They can't even work the VCR. Hopefully there will be a cure soon.
Dr. Devin McEachran, a psychologist who specializes in working with 2E or twice exceptional children, observes that while neurodivergent children often struggle in the physically and intellectually confining context of schools, many are highly successful once they find careers that are well suited to their creative, non-sequential, and out-of-the-box ways of thinking. McEachran argues that neurodiverse minds have advantages, particularly as we shift from the industrial age to an information age, and with the increasing prevalence of phenomena such as artificial intelligence and virtual reality. As Bloom wrote, neurodiversity may be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. Who can say what form of wiring will prove best at any given moment? Cybernetics and computer culture, for example, may favor a somewhat autistic cast of mind. According to youth climate activist Greta Thunberg, Asperger's gave her the single-minded focus to care about the climate emergency in the way that she does, and to research it in a way that few children would do. Had she been neurotypical, she argues, she might have conformed to social expectations of what a child could and should do. According to Thunberg, it is in part because she is neurodivergent that she acts in accordance with what we all know about the climate emergency, but that few of us reflect in our behavior. Had she been a neurotypical and normatively social child, Thunberg moreover observes, she may have joined an environmental organization rather than deciding to strike school alone in front of the Swedish parliament, which, as it turns out, set her on the path to being the climate justice leader that she is today. Like other neurodivergent people, Thunberg describes being shy and private but feeling no fear of public speaking, which surely helps when addressing audiences such as the attendees of the UN Climate Change Conference and the UN Climate Action Summit. It has been argued that neurodiversity is culturally generative, and autism in particular has been described as a culture. Scholars have argued that a number of famous musicians, artists, poets, scientists, and philosophers were neurodivergent, including Mozart and Glenn Gould, Michelangelo and Andy Warhol, Emily Dickinson, Lewis Carroll, and William Butler Yeats, Newton, Darwin, and Einstein, and the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. Today, autistic art has emerged as a vibrant school of visual art, and comedian, writer, and actor Hannah Gadsby has described her neurodiversity as instrumental in her artistic career. Neurological diversity has also been likened within the neurodiversity movement to diversity in sexualities and genders, with some neurodivergent people identifying as neuroqueer. Most notably, M. Remy Yergeau has published the book Authoring Autism on Rhetoric and Neurological Queerness, in which they use a queer theory paradigm to approach autism as an identity rather than an impairment. Queering or neuroqueering cognitive variation does not erase the differences between sexuality and neurotype or sexual oppression and ableism. However, it suggests that logics of domination interlock, just as queer people have been pathologized by medicine and subjected to normalizing medical treatments, such as so-called conversion therapies, neurodivergent people have been subjected to intense normalizing medical treatments, such as so-called behavioral therapies, to suppress the self-stimulating movements that come naturally to their body-minds. In each of the cases of sexual queerness, gender queerness, and neuroqueerness, families are often accomplices in their queer family members' oppression, and parents have often delivered their sexually queer, genderqueer, and neuroqueer children into the hands of doctors for purposes of normalization. The neurodiversity movement that resists such normalization has been closely related to the autism advocacy movement. However, autism is but one way of being neurodivergent. There are numerous ways in which a person's cognitive functioning may differ from what the dominant society currently considers normal, including the ways of thinking that are diagnosed as OCD, ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, epilepsy, and traumatic brain injury. The social model of disability aptly applies to neurodiversity, with scholars and activists arguing that what is considered a cognitive dysfunction in a particular society would be and has been considered normal or advantageous in other societies. For example, it is argued that what is now pathologized as ADHD was a helpful characteristic in hunter-gatherer contexts and went unnoticed in agrarian contexts. Like the broader disability advocacy movement, the neurodiversity movement demands that we shift from thinking about variation in body-minds in terms of a deficit and medical model and move instead towards social acceptance, pride, and a positive ontology of difference. In the article Charting Relations Between Intersectionality Theory and the Neurodiversity Paradigm, psychologist Lauren Rose Strand observes that, quote, the philosophy that underlies the neurodiversity paradigm draws upon both intersectionality and disability studies approaches by applying essential principles of society's embrace of diversity in ethnicity, nationality, religion, and sexuality orientation toward people embodying diverse human neurology, close quote. Beyond this, an intersectional approach should alert us to the fact that neurodivergent people, who tend to be lifted up as examples of the desirability of neurodiversity, including those who have been mentioned in this lecture, are white, have relatively high socioeconomic statuses, and would be categorized by the medical establishment as high functioning. Like disability, neurodiversity is an umbrella category that includes a vast array of body, minds, and experiences, and as in the case of disability more generally, it tends to be the most privileged members of this group whose experiences we learn most about, at least in their own words. We hear a lot about autism from Temple Grandin, for instance, who, if we judge success in terms of how much one contributes to a capitalist economy, has been highly successful in life, increasing profits for large, exploitative, cruel, and environmentally destructive corporations like McDonald's. In contrast, we hear little about or from the Black men whose neurodiversity made them act in ways that neurotypical white police officers perceived as threatening and who were executed on the streets because of this perception. It is so-called high-functioning neurodiverse people who are most often recognized for the unique contributions they can make within a capitalist system, while so-called low-functioning neurodiverse people, particularly those who are non-speaking, remain socially objected and highly vulnerable to violence. Rebecca Mallett and Catherine Runswick-Cole have critiqued what they call the commodification of autism, wherein autism is constructed as a distant object, a thing, in a way that is unparalleled among diagnostic categories of impairment. They see this occurring not only through films such as Rain Man and Temple Grandin, but also through the production of information about autism in the form of journals, conferences, research centers, charities, and classes dedicated to the study of autism as a static neurological phenomenon. Autism even has a logo, the puzzle piece. Although money is made from commodities such as autism films and autism paraphernalia, Mallett and Runswick-Cole argue that autism is primarily consumed in the form of information. As Yergo observes in Authoring Autism, parents of neurodiverse children continually volunteer narratives that feed this mode of production. Autism is fundamentally about narratives of character, and in these narratives, autistic people are rarely the authors of their own lives. Indeed, autistic people have been deemed incapable of autobiography or of knowing what stories will interest a reader. Denied rhetoric, Yergo argues, autistics are denied their humanity, and the knowledge that we have of autism is, in Yergo's words, decidedly non-autistic. Autism stories are more often told by the parents of autistic children, who make themselves the empathetic characters in their own tales. These are stories about what it is like to have a child who refuses to hug, to speak, to be potty trained, to stop spinning and stimming. As Yergo describes, autism is most frequently described as a disaster that happens to families, and having an autistic child is likened to being struck by lightning or to a car crash. Importantly, Mallett and Runswick-Cole argue that in the commodification of autism, the ontological status of neurodivergence goes largely unquestioned, and autism is presented as an ahistorical thing. A medical, biological, neurological paradigm is assumed and goes unchallenged, although much of the work of critical disability studies has been to call this understanding of disability into question. As Mallett and Runswick-Cole write, quote, even when the neurodiversity movement rejects negative, tragic, and deficit aspects of medicine in order to better define themselves, autism is still consumed through medical knowledges. The ability of neurology to explain autism as a thing is not questioned. Medicine is merely requested to change its focus, and autism, as an abstracted biomedical entity, remains relatively undisturbed. This leads to a rather uncomfortable deduction for anyone who considers the academic study of disability to be committed to the emancipation of disabled people from the tyranny of medical discourses. When we discuss autism as a thing, when we hold sessions about it, establish research centers around it, or write articles on it, we are implicated in sustaining the fetish. Close quote. Mallett and Runswick-Cole thus argue that neurodiversity studies scholars and advocates should de-fetishize autism by exploring cognitive difference in ways that are critical of medical paradigms and that consider neurodiversity in conjunction with other categories of impairment or as part of the larger disability advocacy movement.